Drained. Do you feel drained? There are top 4, you could maybe say 5, personality-related reasons why you feel drained, emotionally, mentally, psychologically drained. Hey, welcome to Typevolution. I'm Olympia. I guide curious minds to live in alignment with their personality type using Jungian, Enneagram, and psychospiritual tools so they can feel more fulfilled and attract their match. There are, of course, reasons that are not related to personality, such as physical reasons. So you could be struggling with some physical problems, you might have some disease, syndrome, maybe medication, etc., etc. I'm not going to cover that here. It can also include things like just being tired, not having enough sleep. That obviously would play a role in feeling drained, feeling tired. But that's not really what I mean here. Also, another reason can be that I'm not going to cover in this. When you are surrounded by toxic people, people who are mentally, psychologically unhealthy, they might have personality disorders, or they might just be overly negative, basically. So you want to rule out those aspects first, and then we can go into more personality related aspects that actually relate to you specifically as a human being. So let's jump in, shall we? The first one, number 1, by the way, this is in no particular order per se. I kind of did order it, but it's not like this is the most important reason. That's not. Number 1 is obviously the most well-known introversion, extroversion. Introversion versus extroversion is one of the most well-known personality-related aspects, also from Carl Jung. And you can also see it in the MBTI, in the 16 personalities, in Socionics. Many Jungian-based personality type systems deal with introversion, extroversion. So if you're an introvert, generally speaking, you're going to be overstimulated more easily than if you were an extrovert. Your threshold for mental stimulation is different. It's lower. So you can get overstimulated as a reason. And that means, in essence, you need to dial down the stimulation in order to feel less drained. Now, I want to give a little caveat here that a lot of people tend to ignore or misunderstand. So there's also a difference between sensorial introvert and intuitive introvert, and that can have an impact as well. So in other words, what drains you more, sensory input or intuitive abstract input? This can be very hard to figure out by yourself, by the way. But for example, someone who is an introverted type and also an intuitive type, on average, they will feel more overstimulated by sensorial things. So basically, like noise, a lot of things going on around you, a lot of things that keep changing. So a lot of new sensorial impressions. It can be noise. It can even just be colors or anything that changes in the environment. It can also be people walking around you and stuff like that. So a very disruptive environment. If you are an introvert, especially if you're an intuitive introvert, and especially if you are an INFP or INTP in MBTI, LII and EII in Socionics, then this is going to be especially crucial that you avoid that at high levels. However, I have to give another caveat. Some people don't realize if you have very high introversion, it doesn't even matter anymore whether you are intuitive or sensing type. All kinds of stimulation can be too much. So sometimes people think, oh, I must be an intuitive introvert because I do get bothered by sounds and things like that. But you could also just be very high in introversion, and then it doesn't even matter if you're intuitive or sensing. In that case, you have to really reduce all the stimulation, and you have to see, okay, one might be more crucial than the other, but You don't even have to know the exact specifics here. You just have to reduce it overall. So this is what can happen. Overstimulation from being an introvert, especially if you're high in introversion. Extroversion, the interesting thing is, so the flip side to that is if you're understimulated. And I think this is a common issue nowadays where all kinds of people, I see all kinds of people getting diagnosed with ADHD nowadays. And I am not a psychologist, I am a personality typologist, but you know, it's not dealing with personality type disorders and things like that. So I cannot talk from a medical perspective. However, to me, it does look like a lot of people are not utilizing their extroverted side properly. So there's even people who are introverts getting mistyped with ADHD, or okay, maybe mistyped is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. So if you have an extroverted side that is not getting stimulated properly, especially if you're high in extroversion, obviously, like the more extroverted you are, the more stimulation you need. And once again, it kind of depends on whether you are an intuitive or sensorial extrovert. So if you are intuitive, for example, you might not necessarily be so in love with a lot of sensorial stimulation, right? Like a lot of hustle and bustle and a lot of, things that affect your senses in an intense way or even in an aesthetic way. If you're an intuitive EN type, ENTP, ENFP specifically, they might not even enjoy that as much, but they need a lot of mental stimulation, a lot of, possibilities, potentials, concepts. It can also be theories, especially when it goes to ENTP, especially a lot of theories. You have to have your mind engaged with a lot of new information on concepts and things like that, like feeding your mind with those things. If you're an intuitive, and especially if you're an extrovert type and intuitive, you will need more of that. Now, you might be even an introvert, but you might underutilize your extroversion a little bit. So it's people who kind of lean towards ambiversion, they might still need to engage in the extrovert side a bit more. Personally speaking, I'm quite high in introversion, so I realized that the constant stimulation that I got from being on social media, even YouTube, I would constantly have something on. And I realized how much it diminished my creativity, my thoughts. I have introduced like digital detox weekends where I really, really monitor the amount of stimulation, mental stimulation I get. And it's so much better. Like my creativity is coming back. I can hear my inner voice again. It's so much better. And I was doing something that's not good for my personality. Basically, I was constantly flooding my mind with impressions and things like that. And that was not good for me. So you have to figure out what it is. Where might you be kind of lopsided? Okay, the next one is purpose role. Okay. What that means, if you have been following me for a while, you already know what purpose role is. It is based on the 16 personalities. I have written my type descriptions. You can find them on typevolution.com/TVT. And you can also find them in the description box. Purpose role, I gave every of the 16 Jungian types a purpose role, or I described it. My philosophy is that every personality has a certain purpose, and it's more like a role or like an archetype. It doesn't encompass the entirety of who you are or your entire being, but it does hint at what kind of social role you probably should fulfill more or less. So in other words, you will feel drained if you're not engaging in your purpose, which is probably quite obvious, but I want to point it out here. And purpose, yes, it can mean career, but it doesn't even have to mean career. It can be anything. It can be career, hobby, side gig, pastime, whatever you want to call it. If you spend too much time in something that basically doesn't fit your purpose role or your personality type, then you will feel drained after that. And yeah, it's tricky. So if you want to learn more about the specifics, I would like you to check out the descriptions I have, or get typed by me. I also have typing services. You can also find it on my website, typevision.com/services. If you're confused what your purpose role is, what your personality type is, I can help you out with that. I can assess yours in a session. So I'm not going to go into detail here. I've also made videos about this already. Okay, the next one is instincts. So if you're familiar with the Enneagram, then you probably have heard about the instincts. Social, sexual, self-preservation. I've also made videos about the instincts. Yeah, maybe I should also write it here just in case. So that's also abbreviated as SO, as sex, and as P. Social, sexual, self-preservation. These are the three major instincts in our human psyche. And they really drive our behavior and what will make us feel instinctually fulfilled. So also everyone has a certain order. First, second, third instinct. The first one is the most crucial. The second one, second most. And the third can be a little bit neglected. Now, technically you should fulfill all the instincts to feel the most fulfilled. But if you have to, focus on certain aspects more based on your current lifestyle, then it's best if you focus on the first or second one to feel more fulfilled. And an interesting conundrum I can see sometimes is with extroverts who have the social instinct last. That does happen. It's especially the case quite commonly with extroverts who are a thinking or logical type in the Jungian system as well. They often have a social instinct last, but it can even happen with F-types, the other side of the coin, feeling ethical. In that case, these people, like I said earlier, they need the stimulation, they need higher amounts of it, but if their social instinct is last, then they don't feel that fulfilled by social interactions specifically. So anything that occurs in a certain social context where there are certain social customs and there's a certain culture around it and you are interacting with each other and it's like this platonic interaction, very much friendly. It's tied to society as well. So if you're in those situations and your social instinct is last, you won't really feel that fulfilled by those. On the flip side, if it's your first or second instinct, then you do need those interactions, even if you're an introvert. So this can sometimes create funny combinations or some questions about, okay, what am I? And then often people think, oh, I'm an ambivert because I'm like a mix of both. And usually it's a configuration between the introversion, extroversion, and the instincts. Anyway, I've also made several videos about the instincts. You can also check them out. I've also written articles about them on my website. You need to fulfill them in order to not feel drained. The more you neglect your first and second instincts, the more you will feel emotionally drained. Yeah, okay. Next point, intertype relations. Okay, let me just abbreviate that with ITR, intertype relations. So this is a concept from Socionics. And it's also based on Jung, of course, the 16 types. There are certain interactions based on your personality type compatibility that will drain you more or less than others. If you don't know much about Socionics, you can also just take my quiz, and in the test result you will get the types you're also most compatible with. Anyway, so I cannot go into much depth here. I think I've also got a blog article on my site that goes into how I would rate the intertype relations, like how many stars I would give each one of them. I've also made a video about the Jungian compatibility. Now, if it's with friendships and things like that, it's less important, but it can still play a role. The less compatible you are, like in functional terms, if all your functions are not valued, so if you both have complete opposite functioning that you prefer, so like NE versus NI, SE versus SI, TI versus TE, etc., etc. If it's all opposing, and yeah, then usually there's less compatibility. Now, what bridges the gap is often the club, also called club in Socionics. So For example, technically ENFP and INFJ, they're often said to be the most compatible, one of the most compatible pairings. In actuality, that's wrong. It's wrong because they all have none of the functions they value in common. So all of them are opposite. I'm not going to go into detail now why that's bad or whatever. I mean, it's not bad, but it's just not ideal. And the thing, though, that bridges the gap is that they're both NF types. So if you're both NF types, you're going to still connect on NF topics. But once it goes deeper, once it goes more personal, once it goes more into what is important in life, you will most likely differ. And this even goes beyond like political affiliation, religion, and things like that. Of course, if you have the same politics, the same religion, and things like that, it will once again also be more of a bridge between you two. But even if those things match, still the type compatibility will kind of ruin it a little bit. And you will feel more drained the longer you spend dealing with these types. The longer you are around them for very extended periods of time with no break in between, the more you're trying to build a life together, it will just be more draining. Even if the people are not toxic, that's the thing. Of course, if someone is toxic, it will be draining. But even if they're not, you will realize your energy is kind of going away from you. It's kind of getting sucked out into the ether. That's what I noticed. And I noticed that compatible personality types, it takes much more and it takes much longer until people feel drained from one another. It's actually quite rare. But this is mostly the case also in person interactions. Online, it's not always as accurate. It's different because you are not in the same vicinity of each other. But especially in person, this becomes more and more crucial. All right, the last one that also has a bit of an impact in intertype relations, and it's not exactly personality type related, hence I put it in brackets, but it's still something that a lot of people tend to ignore nowadays, is male-female dynamics, okay? Like, or better, let's say masculine, feminine. Now, as I said earlier, you always have to take into account physical things as well. But it's not just that. It's also, as a man, you have to be surrounded by other men, and as a woman, you have to be surrounded by other women. You kind of have to re-energize yourself through that. Just being around the same gender is important, especially also for your hormonal balance. And the thing is, the masculine and the feminine, they can create a great symbiosis to some extent, but they also can repel each other at the same time. It can create this back and forth dynamic. Even if you have very compatible intertype relations, very compatible personality types, at the end of the day, the masculine has to pull away from the feminine, or both have to pull away from each other and then come back together again, because it's like the more the masculine is in the feminine, the more they become emasculated to some extent. And the more the feminine is in the masculine, she becomes defeminized to some extent as well. So the more these two spend time with each other, the more they become like less of who they are. And you could say, oh, that sounds great. That's what they're supposed to do. But in reality, it kind of also saps away your life force to some extent, like your energy, your physical energy, I guess. It does play a role also with intertype relations and everything else. So yeah. All right. So that's mostly it. Let me know which one of these you are struggling with the most in the comments. Once again, if you want to get my help, if you want to work with me to deal with those matters, these issues, to become more aware and what you can do about it in your own personal life, then make sure you go to typevolution.com/services or just check out my website. Okay, I hope you have a good day and see you in the next video. Bye!